So, in preparation of our long voyage in the car on the road, we are cutting out all of the brackets that hold the seats into place because we're only going to use the rear seats. But I've been using a Sawzall a lot, and I was teaching my son how to use this little one, and I realized that there's a nice tip here that is worth sharing. So I'll share that now. So whenever I use a Sawzall, I do not just sit there and pull the trigger. I always move the tool in and out as if it were a handsaw, like this. And there's a couple advantages to that that are worth considering, even though others might laugh at you and say, hey, it's not a handsaw. The first is that very often, almost always, when you get ready to throw out a blade, you will find that a portion of the blade is severely worn out and another portion is basically brand new. Now, normally the portion right here, closest to the tool, is worn out because that's where you get the most control. But in this case, I had to reach into some sort of sheet metal pockets, and so I had to use the end. And so I can consider saving this tool, this saw blade, still to use in this area. But one of the things you want to do is you want to spread out the wear. You want to wear out the whole blade evenly. And so if you're not constrained to a particular location, you want to try and move this blade back and forth so that this area does some of the cutting and this area does some of the cutting. That will help wear out the teeth more evenly. And so that's one aspect. The other thing it'll do is it'll keep the blade cooler. You can see that this has overheated. As a blade overheats, the teeth can lose their temper. And when they lose their temper, they lose their hardness and they become very soft and they turn into mush very quickly. And so you want to keep the temperature of the blade down. Now, you can do that by taking breaks, of course, but if you're moving out of the, let's say you're cutting through a board that thick. If you're moving into this section starts getting to cool down. And then when you move back, this section starts getting to cool down. So it can really make a big difference when you're doing a lot of cutting about the temperature of the blade. The last thing that moving the blade back and forth manually helps you do is it helps remove basically the chips. So when you look at the anatomy of a saw blade, the reason you have to have these valleys, if you will, if you think of the teeth as the mountaintops, part of the reason you have to have valleys is that as the mountaintop cuts away a bit of metal or wood, it has to go somewhere, and it has to go in these gullets. And then a Sawzall blade will throw those chips back out the back as it's running. Now, the downside about a Sawzall blade is that it doesn't rotate. So if you think of a chainsaw chain, it's always running like this, and it's always taking the chips from where the cut is, throwing them out the back. Same with a circular saw blade. It's always chucking the chips out the back, but a Sawzall blade just goes back and forth. And that means that if you're cutting a board, let's say, like this big between my fingers, then these teeth in the middle, they basically move forward and move back, and they don't often or always get a chance to chuck the chip out the back of the workpiece. And so they can overheat, and then you can get a buildup of sawdust, and it'll stop it from cutting. So anyway, that's kind of just a little bit of the anatomy, if you will. I grabbed this handsaw just to show this as well. Part of what makes a saw take a big chunk of wood is how big this gullet is. Once these gullets are filled up with sawdust, they actually begin to diminish the amount that the saw will cut into the wood or metal, and greatly reduce performance, greatly increase temperature. And then again, once you get to the point where it's overheating like this, you start to ruin the teeth and they'll degrade very, very quickly. So anyway, that is a very useful tip. I've done not any super scientific studies, but I've done some studies and some exercises or experiments, let's say, back and forth with and without this technique, and it does make a considerable difference. The other thing you can do is, if let's just say you're going to go through 5 Sawzall blades to get a job done, instead of going through one and then chucking it, going through the next one and chucking it, use one for like 5 minutes, then take it off and put a fresh one on and let that old blade cool down. It'll reduce the likelihood that you overheat the blade, and overall it will increase the length. All right, I hope that was helpful. If not, give this thing a thumbs down. I won't make stupid content like this anymore. Otherwise, have a good day, folks.